All right there, everyone. After over a year in office, President Donald Trump outpolls the darling of globalism, French President Emmanuel Macron. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. If this is your first time here on this channel, a very warm welcome to you. I post 2 videos a day that analyze current events in line with conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. And now you can help support that in 4 ways: by clicking on that Patreon and PayPal link below and becoming a regular one-time supporter, by taking advantage of our current book deal where you can get my book, Classical versus Modern Education, for only 99 cents at the link below as an ebook download. Third, by taking advantage of our promotion of New Balance sneakers, which contributed to the Donald Trump presidential campaign, by clicking that affiliate link below and sticking it to Nike for promoting Colin Kaepernick. And of course, as always, by hitting that bell and subscribe button. It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to have you as a part of this channel. So, after a year and a half or so in office, our beloved President Donald J. Trump is in fact outpolling the one leader, perhaps more than any other, who is the current representative of the supposedly inevitable, unstoppable future of globalization, and that, of course, would be the French President Emmanuel Macron. I mean, forget Merkel, okay? The fledgling German chancellor. She's not even in the picture at this point. I think her polling is just so low. One of our subscribers sent me an article from The Guardian that takes a look at why that is. Why is it that this supposed fluke, this oaf, this reprehensible moron who won the election only because he colluded with the Russians, how on earth could he possibly be outpolling the most stellar, brilliant, salvific star of globalization like French President Macron? How is this even humanly possible? And that, of course, is what this Guardian article explores. First, let's take Macron. The Guardian does, in fact, admit that Macron is currently, at this moment, an extremely unpopular leader. Even by French standards, he's consistently polling somewhere in the 30% range. He's taken a nosedive among his political base. He's bogged down in an unstable cabinet administration. The French economy is stagnant. Well, of course, the American economy is roaring. It's exploding, growing by nearly 5% GDP last quarter. Unemployment in France remains the same. Poverty rates remain fixed. And this all coming from someone who supposedly led the French nation to embrace the future of free market, transnational globalism by rejecting the far-right nationalist populism and extremism coming from Marine Le Pen, who, of course, doubled her support from the last election. We're not allowed to mention that, but nevertheless. Now, The Guardian is, to their credit, is relatively honest here. They recognize that this collapse in Macron's popularity, and by the way, I don't think, just as an aside, I don't think Macron was ever that popular, you know. He was presented as this new Tony Blair-like center-left globalist, young, virulent, who represents a hopeful, cosmopolitan future. But that profile only went so far. Among the French population, just over 40% of them put their hopes in nationalist populism and retraditionalism of the National Front and Marine Le Pen. I don't think, and for reasons we'll explore later, I don't think Macron was ever that popular. But nevertheless, just for the sake of argument, the article does point out that the implosion of his popularity is not just worrisome to him, to Macron, it's also extremely troubling to Europe's pro-globalization camp, who in many ways have placed their hopes and dreams in Macron to effectively halt the wave of nationalist populism from sweeping the Western world. In other words, after the double shock of Brexit and then the election of Donald Trump, right, there was just this sense that if France succumbed to the tsunami of nationalist populism, then all of Western Europe is going to fall. So as far as they're concerned, as far as the corporatist globalists are concerned, Macron cannot fail. He has to succeed, as far as Europe's pro-globalization crowd is concerned. And how is he doing? Well, Macron is currently polling, if you can believe this, Macron is currently polling lower than Francois Hollande, his extremely unpopular predecessor, at the same stage in his presidency, which of course radically contrasts with Donald Trump, who's polling at a higher popularity than Obama did at this point in his presidency. I mean, you really need to let that hit you. Hollande was one of the single most unpopular French presidents in recent memory. And he was polling at a higher rate than Macron is. Macron wishes he had Hollande's pathetic poll numbers, all right? Now, the article goes on to try to analyze why this is. Why is Trump so popular in comparison to Macron? And the answer is very interesting. The Guardian notes that both Trump and Macron recognized that the old Western middle class was disappearing and that politics was shifting more to the rural base, the middling towns, the farms, the self-employed, the once industrial heartlands of both the United States and France. And this is the region where the future of democracy is going to be decided. We're seeing the same thing in Germany, by the way, where the once industrial heartland of West Germany, which has long been a bastion of unions loyal to the leftist Social Democrats, they're turning more and more to the nationalist populist AfD, the Alternative for Germany. But again, as the Guardian article notes, this is where the similarities between the two presidents end. Macron believed that such a demographic shift required more globalism. France needed to intensify its efforts to reform its economy to align more and more with this inevitable globalist economic structure. Trump believed that globalism itself was the problem. Trump believed that globalism itself was the problem and its economic model was fundamentally contradictory and flawed. And so his answer was to reassert the mechanisms of national sovereignty, such as economic protectionism, limits on free trade, controls on immigration, intensified border security, and spending on vast public infrastructure buildings so as to create jobs in the deindustrialized part of the United States. But then the Guardian goes on to say that the reason Trump is being embraced and Macron rejected is because of the two different kinds of voters that these fellows appeal to. And actually, I think the Guardian is onto something here. While Trump appeals to heartland voters who have bought in fully with his anti-globalization platform, voters who love their nation's culture, customs, and traditions, want to see them celebrated and revered rather than mocked and impugned by globalists, right? Macron's supporters are in many respects a contradictory lot. He has, of course, many in the urban areas who are young, cosmopolitan, hip, fully embrace his visions of globalization. But he has many more supporters who are older and pensioners, public workers, who have largely been shielded from the adverse effects of globalization. And so while as urbanite public workers, which represent a substantial portion of the French population, as urbanite public workers, they're not particularly attracted to the nationalist populism of Marine Le Pen, but neither are they particularly attracted to the idealistic globalization advocated by Macron. Trump's supporters are all in, as it were, right? They are getting everything they want from Trump. Macron's supporters are mixed bags that don't necessarily buy into what he's advocating, even though they preferred him in the last election to the rising nationalist populism that we're seeing particularly in the heartlands of France. And so the article goes on to point out the fundamental demographic problem currently being faced by Macron, but also all those who are advocating globalism in Europe. And I think we can add even those in the United States. The fundamental problem is that the advocates of globalization are increasingly relying on voters who are themselves products of social models and arrangements that dominated the first 3 decades after the Second World War. And these are the ones who are quite literally dying out. They are a declining demographic in the political landscape among democratic nations in the West. However, in contrast to this, there is no indication at all that the rural voter, the basket of deplorables, as Hillary Clinton described them, there's no indication at all that these rural voters are comparably dying away. Indeed, the indication is that they're growing. Unlike urbanites, rural folk are having lots of children. They have a significant demographic advantage to urbanites, and they're growing in their demographic representation. And so for these globalist elites to be advocating economic policies that benefit only a small number of urbanites and metropolitans, while at the same time ignoring those in the national heartlands, it's nothing less than political suicide. And the nationalist populist political right knows it. They're the ones that are creating this mass political realignment among rural voters who are more and more siding with the nationalist populists. This was the magic key behind Trump's victory. Trump won over the rural vote at levels virtually unheard of. Remember, Trump won 1,700 counties out of just over 2,000. The electoral victory of Trump was astounding. This is something nobody in the corporatist media wants to talk about. Well, nobody, that is, except in fairness to this fellow at The Guardian. The nationalist populist right, by evoking the fidelities of the rural vote that seek to overturn the globalist political and economic system, the nationalist populist right are positioning themselves for political dominance, quite literally, for generations to come. That is the politics of the future: nationalism, populism, and traditionalism. And as we're seeing before our very eyes, leaders like Macron and Merkel, they're all setting themselves and the entire globalist political economic system up for an eventual and inevitable political collapse. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Click on our Patreon and PayPal links below where you can become a supporter of this channel and help us to continue to analyze current events in light of conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.